Hello, my name is Jorge Perez, and today I'm going to be presenting on Just Mercy, Chapter 6, Surely Doomed. So right off the bat, we have a couple of characters. We have Bryan Stevenson, who is the author / lawyer / main character of this book. We have Charlie, who is the convicted boy of this chapter. We have Charlie's mom. We have Officer George, who is Charlie's mom's boyfriend. We also have Charlie's grandma. And finally, we have Mr. and Mrs. Jennings. So the conflict of this chapter is that a 14-year-old boy named Charlie is convicted for murdering his mom's abusive boyfriend. And Charlie is charged as an adult and not as a child, which gets him sent to an adult jail where he is sexually molested by other inmates. So the big question is, why was a 14-year-old sent to an adult prison in the first place? And to get a better understanding of this, we have to go to the very beginning of the chapter, where Bryan Stevenson receives a call from an older lady stating that her grandson has been in jail for 2 days and that he needs legal representation. So at this point, Stevenson already has many death row cases he's working on. Because he's in Alabama, Alabama has the highest amount of death row cases. But ultimately, he agrees to help find some kind of representation for Charlie. So the next morning he goes to the courthouse and investigates Charlie's incident report, and immediately some red flags are presented through this incident report. So Charlie is a 14-year-old boy who weighs less than 100 pounds, with no juvenile criminal history, with no prior arrests, no misconduct in school, no delinquencies or prior court appearances. He's a good student who has received certificates for perfect attendance. So it makes you wonder how this boy was charged as an adult and then later sent to this adult jail. And to understand that, we have to look at the events that took place prior to the incident. So Charlie and his mother are at home while George goes out to get drunk. So George is Charlie's mother's boyfriend, but he's also an officer. So George goes out to get drunk because he's an alcoholic, although Charlie's mother advised him not to. So when he arrives at their house, he comes back home drunk, and that causes Charlie's mother to get mad at him. And because she's mad at him, he gets mad at her and then beats Charlie's mom nearly to death, with Charlie in the room as this is taking place. So because of this, Charlie takes matters into his own hands and kills George. After beating Charlie's mother, George goes into a separate room and goes to sleep, and while he's asleep, Charlie finds one of George's guns and shoots him in the head. And because of this, Charlie is convicted of capital murder for killing a quote-unquote good person. So the first passage I chose was this one that says, "I saw tattoos or symbols on his neck, but when I looked more closely, I realized that they were bruises." And the reason I chose this passage is because during this time, Stevenson and Charlie had first encountered each other. And during their first encounter, Stevenson is able to see all the bruises that Charlie's gotten from staying at this adult prison. And according to an article on children in adult prisons from the EJI website, which is the Equal Justice Initiative website, the US is the only country in the world where kids as young as 13 have been sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. These children are also at a greater risk of sexual and physical violence in these jails. They're more prone to an increased trauma. They have increased suicide rates. And like a little side fact, every state in America has the capacity to house juveniles separate from adults, but many refuse to do so. So after reading this last bullet point, you wonder why Charlie was in this adult jail then, if they're able to be separated from adults, if they're juveniles. All of this could have been avoided from the very beginning. Another quote I chose was that George was a law enforcement officer who served with honor, The prosecutor argued, "It is a great loss for the county and a tragedy that a good person could be so heartlessly killed by this young man." And so I chose this quote mostly because this year with the protests that have been going on, the police department has been under the spotlight and judged. And one thing that was able to surface about police officers is that they have a higher rate of domestic violence within their families. And so, based off of an article on protecting police officer families from domestic violence, you can see that officers involved in domestic violence is a serious problem within the police officer families. Where up to 40% of police officers have encountered some sort of domestic violence in their household. Police officers face unique challenges that lead up to a high rate of domestic violence. Obviously, the job is very stressful, which causes them to take it out on their families. Police officer families need state's assistance in countering OIDV, which is Officer Families from Domestic Violence. OIDV can be countered by requiring police agencies to adopt guidelines for dealing with it. So because this is a problem within the police department, a good way to counter this kind of domestic violence is facing it head on and learning about it. Another point is that those that report abuse find that departments often do not believe their claims and do not conduct investigations properly. So in this Charlie incident, we see that although Charlie and their mother were both physically and verbally abused by this police officer named George, all of that was ignored and all of the blame was shifted towards Charlie, who ended up killing George for being so violent. So as soon as these departments take these claims serious, then there really is no solution to this. And so although these are not all the solutions, they are some solutions to helping prevent the problems between youth and adult prisons and officers involved in domestic violence. So one thing we can do is stop sending them to adult prisons, which is the youth. We can send them to juvenile detention centers instead. And another thing that we can do for these kids are resources to help youth out of trouble. So just keeping them out of trouble with resources, whether it be events or just like any kind of resource that helps low-income families, that would definitely benefit these families, these youth. For officers involved in domestic violence, I think policies punishing officers with offenses should be more strict. That if these officers have any sort of domestic violence offense, that they be punished for it, whether it be by suspending them or taking their guns away. I think mental health resources for police officers is also another way of another solution to this problem. And for the victims, I think believing these victims when they have some sort of claim would definitely help these victims out. And that's it for my presentation. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you're having a great day.